This program is rated PG and may contain mature subject matter. Viewer discretion is advised.
Salt may be common, but there is nothing ordinary about it.
Salt is really important in our everyday lives.
This extraordinary substance fills the oceans.
If you were to amass all of that salt and put it all into a ball, it would be about the mass of the moon.
Salt is a very important raw material for the making of all kinds of useful things.
And salt is essential to human life.
You need salt for your very synapses to fire. You need salt for your muscles to contract.
Salt preserves our food.
Adding salt to food makes it more resistant to rot and decay.
And our distant past.
Because of salt, we have King Tut today.
Salt flavors, shapes, and colors our world in surprising ways. Over the next hour, we're conducting a thought experiment to illustrate the amazing and unexpected power of salt in our lives by imagining a world without it. One by one, we'll strip away salt's essential role in nature, industry, cuisine, and medicine.
Without salt, the world as we know it wouldn't exist.
This is History Erased. The world without salt. The story of salt begins before the birth of our planet. Throughout time, salt has shaped human evolution and transformed world history. Today, in our thought experiment, we're going to follow the lives of three friends as they prepare for and enjoy a backyard gathering. Through them, we'll get a glimpse of just how important salt is to everyone on the planet.
More than 4.5 billion years ago, our solar system started as a giant cloud of dust and gas that included salts. All of those salt compounds were in the rocks and soil that became our Earth over time.
Salts are composed of positive and negative ions that are held together by electrostatic forces. So there are many different kinds of salts. But the one that is most interesting is indeed sodium chloride.
Sodium chloride is found in the vast amounts in our oceans.
The story of salt is essentially a story of tectonics and volcanic activity here on Earth. The volcanic rock leached into the water, and over a long period of time, that's what salted the oceans.
These ultra-salty new oceans may have been the incubator for all life on Earth.
There are tiny microorganisms called halophiles who lived in this salty, briny water. And some scientists believe that those halophiles are responsible for oxygenating Earth's atmosphere.
These creatures actually oxygenated the world to a point that the precursors to life as we know it today were able to exist.
Over millions of years, some of the water evaporated, leaving behind massive salt deposits on the surface and deep underground.
Salt has shaped these highly complex but beautiful geological structures.
When the human species emerged, salt was abundant, and it didn't take long for our prehistoric ancestors to recognize salt's usefulness.
One of the biggest impacts of salt on our way of life as we know it is its preservation qualities.
Salt stops microbes from forming and growing.
By curing the meat with salt, you're basically removing the water, and then the bacteria cannot thrive.
And if the bacteria can't survive, your food lasts longer.
We now know that too much salt isn't good for the heart, but it has enabled foods to last much longer. By using salt as a preservative, early humans found a way to stabilize their food supply.
Before the invention of refrigerators, it was really difficult to have reliable access to food throughout the year. Communities that used salt to preserve their food were able to grow larger. Because they had more reliable access to food, they also could feed more people.
The role of salt as a preservative had a huge impact on development of society.
And salt-preserved foods helped civilizations expand by enabling long sea voyages.
Explorers and travelers had to figure out ways to keep their food safe and edible throughout their long journeys.
Salt allowed for these long journeys without access to fresh sources of food.
Starting in the 15th century, salt-preserved foods enabled an explosion in globe-spanning sea voyages by European powers.
Salt allowed the explorers to survive by preserving the food they carried with them.
Voyagers to North America found an abundance of cod around the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, and salt allowed them to preserve this precious new commodity for the markets back in Europe.
Salt, again, was a great preserver, and that was a great commodity to exchange and trade.
If they hadn't been able to preserve the cod, there would not have been all the explorers coming to North America, because many of them came for the cod fishing.
Salted cod has remained a staple to this day. And for this man, it will make the perfect meal to share with his friends at an afternoon gathering. Salt also played an unexpected life-saving role on the high seas.
Scurvy was the curse of ocean voyages. It was very common to lose half of your sailors on a long ocean trip.
Luckily for some explorers, salt was on board.
On Columbus's early voyages, an Italian pickle merchant, Amerigo Vespucci, stocked the ship with salt-preserved pickles. And the vitamin C in those pickles prevented the crew from getting scurvy, which may have killed them all.
Amerigo Vespucci's contribution extends beyond supplying Columbus with life-saving supplies. In 1507, cartographers coined the term America after his voyages to a distant continent, or New World.
James Cook took sauerkraut with him on his long voyages to the South Seas. There's a high salt content in sauerkraut to make sure that disease-causing organisms do not grow in there. He didn't know that sauerkraut is indeed very rich in vitamin C.
Without salt, a lot of these expeditions into the unknown world wouldn't have happened, and the world as we know it would be totally different.
Humans have been pickling vegetables for millennia. Cucumbers were first pickled 4,000 years ago in the Indus Valley, now modern Pakistan and India. Since then, pickles have sustained huge armies and found their way into the hulls of legendary queens.
Cleopatra claimed that her health and legendary beauty was because of her steady diet of pickles. Julius Caesar actually gave his soldiers pickles because he believed it would make them stronger on the battlefield.
Centuries later, pickles provided sustenance for another army. During World War II, 40% of America's pickle production was set aside for the armed forces. These days, 5.2 million pounds of pickles are consumed annually in the United States. Salt is a fundamental ingredient in many delicacies across many cultures.
There's just something about our taste buds and our connection to salt.
They say there are only 3 ingredients needed to make the Italian favorite prosciutto: pork, salt, and thyme.
Most of us love prosciutto. Most of us love salty things.
If you think of the cured hams of Italy, or if you think of salted cod from Newfoundland,
Most Caribbean islands use salted codfish in at least one of their traditional dishes.
In Korea, kimchi is just a way of life. It's a fermentation product in a salty solution.
Kimchi is big business. There's more than 1.5 million tons of kimchi produced every year.
Salt is also fundamental to the cheese-making process.
When it comes to making cheese, salt is important not only for its preservative properties, but also because it draws out moisture from the cheese, which changes the texture and structure of that cheese, altering its flavor and how much we like it.
And our friend looks forward to enjoying some fine cheese with his companions at their get-together. Salt is fundamental to human culture.
Yeah.
Look what I brought.
And an essential ingredient in our cuisine. But now, as we roll into our thought experiment and erase the first contributions from salt, our lives become bland.
It is hard to imagine the world without salt. We wouldn't have the variety of dishes we have today around the world.
What would we do without potato chips or pickles?
Without salt, our food selection is much more limited and much less tasty.
So many cultures have relied on salt, not only for preserving food, but also for enhancing flavor. So without salt, all of that culinary history would disappear. Food would be very, very bland.
Food spoils rapidly without salt's preservative powers, meaning food security is taken away from millions of people.
Take away salt and the preservative qualities of salt, and the world looks a lot different.
Many people who live in conditions where refrigeration is not available rely on salt to preserve food. Without that ability of salt to preserve food, many people would die.
A world without salt would be unrecognizable.
Next, we'll see how erasing salt's central role in politics and culture has severe consequences for this group of friends and the entire planet. In our thought experiment, the world and our group of friends has suffered with the loss of salt's flavor and preservation properties. Now, as our experiment continues, we're going to look at salt's incredible influence on culture, religion, and politics. The ancient Egyptians used a substance they called divine salt, or natron, for mummification.
Natron is a naturally occurring chemical salt similar to sodium bicarbonate.
There are huge fields of this in Egypt. They found that when they immersed the body in this salt, it would draw out the water, and that allowed the body to be preserved.
Bodies were soaked in natron salts for about 40 days, and then the empty cavities were filled with linens and herbs and sawdust and sand.
The Egyptians took out the heart and they pickled it with salt, just like we would today make cucumbers into pickles.
Because of salt, we have King Tutankhamun, who was buried 3,000 years ago, but preserved through mummification.
When King Tut's tomb was discovered in the 1920s, it set off an Egyptology craze around the world.
The ability of natron salt to preserve mummies allowed us to understand the past.
Natron deposits are found all over the world, but one of the most spectacular is in Lake Natron in Tanzania.
The high concentrations of natron cause the lake to appear red and pink.
There is one kind of organism that can grow in that lake, and that is a type of algae called cyanobacteria. The
iconic flamingo has evolved to withstand the ultra-salty brine and feeds on the crimson-colored algae.
The red pigments in the lake give them their beautiful pink color.
Without salt, pink flamingos would lose their salty sanctuary and their trademark color.
Salts like natron and sodium chloride were revered by ancient people, and salt was a central feature in religious practice.
Salt has the aura of being a purifying substance.
Salt was really important in a lot of religious beliefs and cultural customs.
In Jewish dietary laws, meat has to have the blood drained out of it before it is eaten. And the way to drain the blood out of the meat is to coat it with kosher salt. Jesus also used the expression to his disciples, "You are the salt of the earth." That meant that they were very important and had to be pure.
In traditional Japanese Shinto religion, salt was sometimes used in ritual purification, a practice that can still be seen in modern sumo.
Sumo wrestlers before a bout, will take salt and sprinkle it in the ring to purify it.
Salt has helped to preserve religious artifacts from the distant past, including the famous scrolls found in 1947 in caves near the Dead Sea.
The Dead Sea Scrolls are on a parchment, and in order to make that, you use salt. You rub it into the animal skins from which the parchment was made. And for thousands of years, the ancient scrolls were able to be preserved.
Many of the things we currently understand related to human history is because of the salt ability to preserve through time.
During the Second World War, the Nazis took advantage of salt's preservative power to conceal one of their crimes by hiding 12,000 pieces of stolen art in the Alt-Aussee salt mine in Austria.
The Nazis stored a lot of their stolen artwork in these salt caves. The environment there has virtually zero humidity because the salt will absorb it. So it's ideal for storing anything that would be susceptible to moisture.
Salt's inherent value has placed it center stage in dramatic political events throughout history.
One of the greatest symbolic acts of all time involved salt. And of course, I'm talking about Mahatma Gandhi and his Great Salt March. The British doubled the salt tax, but Gandhi wanted to make an important point, and what he said is, to tax salt is like taxing the air.
60,000 people were arrested during this protest, including Mahatma Gandhi, and this put into motion the Indian independence movement. Mahatma Gandhi's protest tactics caught the attention of Martin Luther King Jr., who was keen to employ them himself in the American civil rights movement.
We will continue the protest in the same spirit of love and nonviolence and passive resistance.
Throughout history, salt has often been a catalyst for change.
One of the most important causes of the French Revolution was the Gabelle salt tax. Immediately preceding the revolution, thousands of people were persecuted for having possession of contraband salt.
Not only has salt sparked revolutions, it also ushered in a revolutionary technology with a flash.
Salts are a combination of positive and negative ions. Silver salts just mean that the positive ion comes from silver. Upon exposure to light, silver salts will turn black.
This chemical reaction captures images on paper or celluloid. Silver salts enabled still photography and motion pictures, the definitive art form of the 20th century.
Until maybe 20 years ago, silver salts were absolutely critical to filming.
Now, as we roll on with our thought experiment, we strip away salt's contributions to culture, religion, and entertainment.
It is hard to imagine the world without salt.
If you think of mummification and ancient Egyptian civilizations, if you think of the Dead Sea Scrolls, without salt, all of that history would disappear.
All ancient documents would not have lasted as long had they not been salted.
And the course of history as we know it would have been fundamentally altered without salt.
All of these iconic moments in history, the French Revolution,
Gandhi's Salt March, his nonviolent civil disobedience, the Civil Rights Movement,
how our societies developed can be attributed directly to the role of salt.
Without silver salts, much of our visual and cultural heritage of films and photos fade away.
The whole movie industry and photography would never have been possible without silver salts.
As the world sinks deeper into chaos and confusion, things deteriorate for our group of friends and the entire world. As we strip away salt's economic power and its role in the environment. Today in our thought experiment, people around the world and this group of friends have been shaken by the loss of salt in cuisine and culture. As our story continues, we'll investigate salt's foundational role in some of our most important cities and the incredible impact of salt on global weather.
There are about 50 million billion tons of salt in the ocean. If you took all of that salt out of the ocean and spread it out over land, you'd get a sheet of salt about the height of a 40-story building.
When you have salty water, what you end up with is dense water, and dense water sinks.
The density of the ocean controls the way that currents flow. That controls the temperature of the air above the ocean, which in turn controls the wind and controls climate.
The ocean currents move from the tropics to the poles.
And that's what spreads warm temperatures all around the globe. If we did lose salt in our oceans, the results of that could be catastrophic.
Climate isn't the only thing affected by this amazing substance. Some of the most iconic cities in history were built because of salt.
There have been a lot of human settlements that have been built around salt mines.
Trading commodities has established most of the major cities around the world, and salt is a very big commodity.
Archaeologists believe that the earliest known town in Europe, located in present-day Bulgaria, was built beside a salt production facility around 7,000 years ago. Since then, many famous towns and cities have emerged near salt mines, including the iconic city of Salzburg, which means Salt Castle.
Salzburg in Austria is famous because of the salt mines, and also because that's where Mozart was born.
Art, music, and culture flourished in towns like Salzburg due to long-term stability and wealth from the salt trade. Liverpool is another major city that was put on the map by salt.
Liverpool, in some sense, owes its existence to being close to the Cheshire salt mines.
Liverpool became the prime exporting port for salt in the 19th century. It then later developed to be a prime hub for travel and immigration from Europe to the United States.
So if there was no salt, there would be no Liverpool. And if there was no Liverpool, there would be no Beatles. My parents met in London, and the one thing that they really had in common is that they both loved the Beatles. And so without the Beatles, I actually would not be here right now.
Long before the Beatles, the salt trade was instrumental in the formation of trade routes and the wealth of empires.
Salt, of course, had to be transported, and the roads by which it was transported were the so-called salt routes.
Via Salaria is one of the oldest roads in Italy. It literally means salt route.
Salt enabled the development of trade networks, also increasing the cultural diversity in the societies.
Salt was also traded on trans-Saharan trade routes. This contributed to the rise of different African nations and also to the spread of Islam.
Salt is highly prized for another unexpected reason. It makes the perfect driving surface.
Salt flats are places where high salinity lake or an ocean has been dried up.
As far as the eye can see, you see this flat plain of salt, which of course is great when you're looking for speed.
In 1935, World War I pilot and race car driver Malcolm Campbell reached a land speed milestone on the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah.
It was the first time that a speed of 300 miles per hour was achieved.
Since then, this site has seen dozens of land speed records shattered. At 10,582 square kilometers, the Uyuni Salt Flats in Bolivia are the world's largest. And during the rainy season, they become the world's largest mirror.
Salt flats are highly reflective, so it's like a mirror, and you can actually see the skies or the clouds reflected in the salt flat.
As we continue our thought experiment, major catastrophes erupt as salt continues to vanish from our world.
If the production and mining of salt were suddenly lost, trade routes would suffer, economies would suffer.
Without salt, certain large cities never would have developed.
And the loss of salt in the oceans causes unprecedented natural disasters.
The density of the water would change dramatically, and that would have a very significant effect on geology.
If salt in the oceans were suddenly erased and its climate-controlling properties were lost, a lot of different natural catastrophes would become much more common.
We would lose all of our marine life because it's all been adapted to a saline environment.
We would have fierce storms, violent winds.
As this group of friends and the rest of the world struggles with environmental catastrophes from the loss of salt, things are about to get worse as we erase salt's many industrial uses. Salt is crucial to industry and critical infrastructure.
The largest consumer of salt is the chemical industry. Only about 6% of the salt is used for human consumption.
Salt is the raw material that's used in caustic soda, in soda ash, and in chlorine. Caustic soda, for instance, is used in everything from textiles to detergents to pulp and paper.
A German scientist named Karl Dahl in the 1880s used caustic soda to turn wood into pulp. Today, 3/4 of pulp production around the world uses Karl Dahl's technique.
Salt-derived caustic soda is also essential to the textile industry.
About 90% of the cotton produced in the world today is treated with caustic soda to prepare it for bleaching and dyeing.
The worldwide textile industry is much more colorful because of sodium hydroxide or caustic soda.
These salts can also be extremely hazardous.
It is really a double-edged sword. Ammonium nitrate, it is a salt and a classic fertilizer. It supplies nitrogen to the soil, and basically it is what made the Green Revolution possible. It has fed millions of people around the world. However, it can also be devastating.
On August 4th, 2020, 2,750 tons of improperly stored ammonium nitrate exploded in Beirut, Lebanon, killing hundreds and injuring thousands more.
The city was almost completely destroyed by this explosion. There are no safe or dangerous chemicals. There are only safe or dangerous ways to use chemicals.
A powerful life-saving reactive substance was first isolated in the 18th century.
Chlorine is one of the elements that makes up common salt, or sodium chloride, and it was discovered by Wilhelm Scheele in the 1700s.
We use chlorine to purify our water. It's something we've all taken for granted.
Having chlorinated water has really reduced waterborne diseases.
It has saved millions and millions of lives. It's probably the greatest advance in public health ever. However, there's another side to chlorine. Chlorine is a highly toxic gas.
During the First World War, German forces unleashed chlorine gas as a chemical weapon.
When you inhale chlorine gas, it will eat away the esophagus. It's terrible.
Luckily, a Canadian scientist and chlorine expert named George Naismith was on the scene, ensuring proper sanitation and safe drinking water.
George Naismith was at the battlefield, and he was able to detect that this approaching cloud was chlorine. He instructed all the soldiers to immediately take a rag, urinate on it, and cover their mouths. This neutralized the gas and saved many lives.
After the battle, Naismith discovered that putting a cotton pad soaked with hyposulfate of soda over the mouth and nose would counter the effects of the toxic gas.
This led Naismith to develop gas masks.
Gas masks were born out of the need to offer protection against poison gases, but they have evolved over the years.
Today, gas masks and protective face coverings keep millions safe around the world. Chlorine is also a key component in one of the world's most widely used plastics, polyvinyl chloride, or PVC.
PVC could not be made without chlorine, and chlorine could not be made without salt.
Over 40 million tons of PVC are produced annually.
Many common plastic or vinyl household items are made of PVC.
PVC is used in everything from bank cards to bottles, computer and TV shells, windows, doors, to plumbing pipes.
Many of our water pipes are made of polyvinyl chloride.
And power transmission in our homes and offices is made safe by this versatile salt-derived plastic.
The insulation on electrical wires was made of PVC. It is used basically everywhere.
As we continue our thought experiment and erase salt's key role in modern industry, the devastating effects engulf the world in filth, disease, and misery.
Salt-based sanitation like chlorine is actually essential. Without it, our water would be like cesspools. It would be filth-ridden and dirty and unsafe to drink.
That would cause rampant disease and ultimately loss of life.
As salt disappears, many materials essential in our modern world cease to function. As PVC fails, plumbing and sewage pipes rupture, spilling their contents.
Our society would be hard-pressed to function without polyvinyl chloride.
Massive infrastructure and health problems would plague the entire planet.
We wouldn't have the PVC insulation on electrical wires.
When the PVC insulating our power lines breaks down, electricity shorts out, causing critical failures and fires all over the world.
It's really one of the most important of all the industrial chemicals that we have.
Without salt, common household items made of PVC fall apart.
Are you okay? It would be catastrophic. Many lives would be lost.
Can we get some help?
As the new reality of life without these salt-derived technologies and materials shakes up our friends and the world, things dissolve further as salt's role in health and medicine are erased. We've stripped away salt's key role in culture, industry, and climate. And people across the globe, including our group of friends, have suffered the consequences. Now our thought experiment continues as we explore salt-based innovations in health and medicine. For our well-being and very survival, salt is essential. But it's also potentially dangerous.
Too much salt could lead to things like heart disease, high blood pressure, kidney disease, osteoporosis, cancer, stroke. But salt is necessary for life as we know it.
As human beings, we're electric bodies. You need salt for your very synapses to fire.
Nerve cells throughout your body send electrical signals when they receive a stimulus.
Whenever electric current flows down a nerve cell, there's an influx and outflow of sodium ions.
The electric properties of animal bodies were first discovered in the 18th century by Luigi Galvani.
Luigi Galvani found that when he took the leg of a dead frog and sparked that frog leg with some static electricity, the leg began to quiver.
Scientists later discovered that many human body functions are electric, including the heartbeat.
Salt regulates and drives the phenomenon known as the action potentials that keeps our heart going.
When it comes to medicine, salt is a prominent feature of countless medical treatments throughout history.
One of the earliest pharmacology books was published by a Chinese emperor in 2700 BCE. It had 40 different medical treatments that involved salt.
The healing powers of salt were also celebrated in the works of the ancient Greek physician Hippocrates, and by the medieval Islamic physician known in the West as Avicenna.
Avicenna's book, The Canon of Medicine, was used well into the 18th century, and it established a lot of the medical practices that are still used today. And many of Avicenna's treatments relied on salt.
One of the most common and effective treatments in modern medicine is a simple salt-water mixture known as saline solution.
This diluted and sterile salt water is used to replace bodily fluids, which is important for treating things like dehydration and other ailments.
Salt also helps protect our well-being by keeping us clean.
When soda ash combines with fats, we get soap. Soap is a long molecule. The sodium end dissolves in water. The so-called fatty acid end dissolves in greasy material. So when we rinse with water, the soap will pull the grease off.
A popular legend claims that soap was discovered by ancient people after performing ritual animal sacrifice.
The animals were sacrificed over fire. And this fat and the ashes with rainwater were carried down the hill into the river. And when women came to wash their clothes in this river, they found that the water would foam and their clothes would become clean.
Florence Nightingale, founder of the secular nursing school in 1860, first advocated for washing with soap during the Crimean War.
Florence Nightingale traveled to treat wounded soldiers, and her hygiene practices dramatically increased the survival rate of the soldiers.
Soap is definitely one of our first lines of defense against pathogens or infections. When we're in, for example, a pandemic or exposed to any type of pathogenic organism.
Now, as we reach the final phase of our thought experiment, we strip away the vital role of salt in health, hygiene, and medicine.
If we suddenly lost the cleaning properties of salt-based soaps, human diseases would go unchecked.
Take away salt from the field of medicine and life expectancies plummet.
And as salt within our bloodstream begins to break down, our bodies stop functioning.
If the salt in our bodies disappeared, our muscles and organs couldn't operate properly.
Just a few salts are regulating how and when our heart beats and controls pretty much life or death.
As our thought experiment reaches its terrifying conclusion, things become incredibly dire around the world and for this group of friends.
Without the salt in our body, we would be in mortal danger.
We'd be doomed.
In our thought experiment, this group of friends and the entire world have suffered greatly as salt was stripped away from medicine.
Without salt, we would all have heart attacks.
Industry.
Salt plays a pivotal role in the production of material that we use in our everyday lives.
The environment.
Salt regulates movement of the ocean currents.
And our food.
Salt makes food resistant to rot and decay.
Thankfully, the amazing contributions salt has given the world live on.
Salt isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Salt is critical to human survival. Salt is critical to manufacturing. And that's going to continue for a long, long time to come.
Salt seems destined to be sprinkled throughout humanity's future. Researchers at Stanford University have discovered a way to generate hydrogen fuel from salt water using solar energy.
Salt water is virtually unlimited in supply.
They're using solar power to split the seawater into hydrogen and oxygen. And then the plan is to use the hydrogen for hydrogen fuel.
This would be a game changer because as our planet is heating up, not producing carbon dioxide would be a major win.
Swiss company NanoFlowCell is bringing to market a 48-volt battery for electric vehicles that uses salt nanoparticles to generate abundant electricity. These automobiles rival high-end fuel-burning sports cars in performance, horsepower, and speed. And their salt-based batteries last longer than a full tank of fuel.
This car moves us further away from fossil fuels and closer to a world without carbon emissions.
Salt also helps us search for extraterrestrial life.
In 2015, NASA scientists discovered that the dark features covering Jupiter's moon Europa could actually be salt flats from a subsurface ocean. If there is an ocean under the surface of Europa, it could indicate the presence of life.
Back on Earth, the life-saving benefits of salt continue to push the boundaries of modern medicine.
Researchers out of Tel Aviv University are using silver salts in combinations with lasers to create modern sutures. So essentially, the laser lights up with infrared light in combination with the silver halides. This forms a sort of welding property that can weld tissue together.
As salt guides us into the future, the possibilities are infinite.
Salt is amazing because it allows us to understand many aspects of the evolution of the planet.
Obviously, the fact that salt can be the starting point for so many things that are completely different and unrelated means that there are endless possibilities.
If anything, our need for salt will expand as the population grows. So it's really an ongoing story.